All right, I got my guy Cameron George, the founder of True Kava. This guy is an expert in all things health and plant-based wellness, but he's got an amazing story. We had him on a long time ago, actually, on one of the podcasts, talking about his battle with autoimmune issues and how he actually found relief through kava. So much to the point that he actually started his own kava company, and he's got me drinking it now too on a regular basis. And he's also pioneering and on the tip of the spear of this growing and sober curious movement. Cameron, welcome to the show, brother.
Oh, great to be here, man.
Yeah, dude, talk to everybody. I want to just remind people of your hero story and how you got here, because I mean, when I heard your story, I was just like, and then I met you in person at a conference. Like, no way! Like you were on you were a collegiate athlete who was not strung out on benzos. Maybe you were, but like those are hard to like break through. And there's a friend of mine in the wellness industry, and he's got a huge following. Actually, Cold Plunge Cam. I don't know if you ever met this guy. His name's Cameron too. He goes by Cold Plunge Cam. Check him out on Instagram. Got a massive following, but he has recently talked and opened up to his social media, just saying, "Hey, like I'm coming off benzoids and it is super, super hard." And of course, I thought of you and Kava, but he's doing his own thing to try to regulate that. But I see his regular struggle in just dealing with it. And I can't imagine like what you had to go through. But that was kind of how you found Kava. But for those people that don't know, like, yeah, talk about that story briefly.
Yeah, it's extraordinarily difficult, right? I mean, benzodiazepines. So, for anyone that doesn't know, benzos are a class of pharmaceutical drugs that are normally used for anxiety and for like sleep disorders and stuff like that. But they cause way more problems than they ever solve. In fact, no drug really solves problems outside of like antibiotics and certain things. They're for short-term emergency situations, but they're prescribed for anxiety and sometimes seizures, like in my case. But they're inhibitory drugs that calm the nervous system. But they're extraordinarily addictive. They deplete your body's natural chemical called GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid, that is the ultimate brakes of the nervous system. And whenever you deplete that chemical, you have no defense against stress, and your body rages into this excitotoxic, inflammatory, stimulating storm that just persists and can persist for weeks to months, and sometimes even years if you're fragile and non-adaptive enough. If you go off of these drugs like very quickly or too quickly and don't taper correctly and stuff like that. And the same thing happens with alcohol, by the way. Alcohol and benzodiazepines are the two drugs that you can actually die from the withdrawals if you go off cold turkey. So like benzos are like Xanax and Klonopin, those types of drugs, and Ativan and stuff like that, lorazepam, any of the AMs. So like anyone who's watched the show before, back to our first conversation, will remember I pretty much had this total collapse of my health in my early 20s, right? So my story is not that dissimilar from like so many people today that kind of work and play in our world and, are in our industry, whether they're in health, wellness, personal development, either on the clinical side or on the lifestyle side. Like there's just so many of what I call pain to purpose journeys that sculpt people into health warriors to some degree, or very driven people that just want to find answers and give them to people. And it usually just comes out of a direct experience with the disease process on varying different levels. But I was on the severe end of that of that category, right? Total collapse of my health in my early 20s. Was a high functioning kid at the time. Working 3 jobs, going to university, or actually, going to university. I was an elite athlete in college at the time. Distance runner, running 160 miles a week. So high functioning guy. All of a sudden started to get all kinds of dysfunctional nervous system disturbances, I guess you would say. Everything from like, it started with light chronic fatigue and depression and anxiety and all the standard sort of symptoms of metabolic dysfunction or lack of energy in the cell or in the body. And then it just persisted and got worse and worse and worse. I thought I was overtraining, so I backed off, didn't get any better. And I ended up on the couch, for weeks to months, like barely just able to even like function. And that was not me at all. It was sort of like completely out of character for me, because I was wired to be totally the opposite. I was anything but lazy, and it wasn't a moral failing. It was, as people like Dave Asprey would say, and has said many times, like it was a hardware issue. It was a brain and body hardware issue, driven by what I later found out to be a neurotoxin driven autoimmune spectrum illness. And that's a mouthful, but essentially most of the illnesses that we see today that are quote unquote unexplainable or are starting to become more explained, right, with all the education out there and people in the alternative media and authors and functional medicine doctors, but still large in part unexplainable to a large number of people. The kind of illnesses where you just get sick, but you can't get in a succinct concrete diagnosis from your standard care physician because you don't have like a positive on a blood test that tells you that you have a specific autoimmune condition, right? Or a specific brain condition, or you don't have an anatomical aberration, right? Anywhere in your body on like a CT scan, right? They scan your brain and, oh, the brain looks normal. It's like, well, wrong scan, right? Because you have to do what's called a functional brain scan, which will tell you how your brain's actually functioning, not just taking a snapshot of your physical brain. That doesn't tell you anything other than if you have like a tumor or a lesion where there's a physiologic substantial change to the tissue. So in other words, like the tests that we have in allopathic medicine to this day, although very useful for short acute emergencies, situations, obviously, if I get hit by a car, right, I want to get in the ER as soon as possible and get my scans and get my surgery and all that.
Right.
But like for chronic conditions that develop over time, these tests that we use to discern whether or not someone has disease or not are only really targeted for like the severely progressed end stage of something. Once there's a physical change where it's an undeniable, or you have a blood test that tells you that you have so many antibodies, so much inflammation that we can say you have autoimmune disease. But long before then, the autoimmune process is starting, and the autoimmune process is basically what drives most chronic illnesses today. Like I said, like the unexplainables, the chronic fatigues, the brain fogs, the anxieties, the depressions, the gut issues, right? The digestive issues, the sleep issues, all of these things that may not even be occurring at a level that's like drastically life limiting. They can be anywhere from mild, to moderate to severe, where you actually end up in a doctor's office or in a functional medicine doctor's office eventually, if you're smart. These things occur on a spectrum, but most of them, if not basically all of them, are autoimmune in component. What that means is, we all know autoimmune is, the body's own immune system flailing up and creating friendly fire by generating inflammation. But it's caused by chronic inflammation. When I think of chronic inflammation, I think of chronic irritation, right? So it's driven by a combination of different stressors in the environment. They can be physical stressors, emotional stressors, or they can be chemical stressors like we're exposed to, like we're learning so much about due to people like Bobby Kennedy out there doing such great work. All the additives that we've sort of been poisoned by inadvertently by industry, in the food, from agriculture, in our dental fillings, and then we're prescribed pharmaceutical drugs for the symptoms that are then further toxic. And so, but that's really the epidemic, is that all this autoimmune disease is driven by a bioaccumulation of foreign molecules in our system and emotional stressors and emotional traumas that create negative chemistry in our body too, that basically causes our body to go into this defense mode where the immune system just starts firing and loses the intelligence and the signaling ability to coordinate a targeted, correct response, and it never shuts off. And it's firing all these missiles, this inflammation, and there's enemies there, but it's damaging the entire tissue, and then it swells your brain, and then it swells your nervous system, and then you get all these symptoms, right? Because then energy drops in the cell, and when energy drops in the cell, then nothing works. You can't produce the right neurotransmitters to keep you from being depressed. You can't produce the right neurotransmitters to allow you to sleep and to calm down. So there's just this kind of explosion of illness, that most of the spectrum of illness doesn't have like labels, or you can take this test and it's this, but it by your dysfunction, right? So anyways, that was me, right? But I was on the severe end of that, and this happened to me in a time where all this information wasn't readily available to us like it is now.
For most people, it's not. So this is great to hear your story, because then light bulbs can go off and go, oh yeah, I remember when Cameron went through that and he didn't know.
Yeah, exactly. And I didn't, because this was not that long ago, 10, 15 years ago or whatnot, but still, at that point, we didn't have this sort of renaissance period that we have now that's exploding with all of these great podcasters like yourself and New York Times bestselling authors and this sort of coalition network of like people who are personal development advocates and health and biohacking enthusiasts and people taking it into their own hands and actually looking at the science instead of like, looking at this archaic system that we call the medical system that was just designed to to treat emergencies and that doesn't understand chronic illness. So I didn't have any of that back then. I got thrown into this situation and then basically, just like so many of us, had to spend the next almost 10 years just doing nothing but scouring medical and scientific literature and traveling around in my very, very weak and compromised state with my family, helping and supporting me, and just going to different clinics and engaging in what I call medical tourism, just different doctors all over the place, all over the world, trying to piece together like what the hell happened. And all this story that I just told you was not something that just came natural to me. That's an accumulation, that philosophical understanding and of diagnosis of the overarching issue and the situation was something that was a developed understanding over years and years of learning what had actually happened. Over time, once I actually learned, then I could start connecting with the right people and functional medicine physicians, et cetera, to start addressing it. I had to go through a long period of what we call true cellular or intracellular detoxification, a medically constructed deep tissue detoxification, not like a liver or a colon cleanse, just dumping what's sitting in your gut, but actually like reducing the concentration of accumulated toxins that's in our food and our water and all that stuff that accumulate in the brain tissue that drive this problem and that keep you sick. I did that. And then on the latter end, I totally reconstructed my diet to be clean and nourishing and eating the right fats and the building blocks and the proteins and all that stuff. And then did a lot of regenerative medicine stuff like stem cells and hyperbaric oxygen to heal the damaged tissues. But I was so sick at one point that I didn't walk for 2 years. I was completely incapacitated, and how I got on the benzodiazepine drugs was my body was flailing these autoimmune responses so frequently that it started basically flailing a reactive defensive autoimmune inflammatory response to just almost everything that was coming in contact with my body. And I had to be quarantined in this medical research facility because my autoimmune was just so bad that I developed crazy food sensitivities that like I would eat a bite of food and just go into a crazy reaction, like anaphylaxis in some cases where the throat would swell up and couldn't breathe. And in others, it was more of a nervous system reaction that would send me into a convulsion or a seizure. And seizure activity, I ended up basically having like 10 seizures a day, which is then why I was put on benzodiazepines. And that turned out to be a really big disaster really quickly because as the drugs work, all synthetic drugs are foreign molecules to the body that are not part of the living intelligence of the natural ecology that our bodies are shaped by, what we call nature. The intelligence, call it Gaia, God, universe, whatever, whatever name you give to it, the intelligence is undeniable and that it's there. If you don't believe that, then cut your arm and see if it doesn't just heal on its own. And intelligence materializes this healing process and it just reverts back to a state of health. But anyways, yeah, like because pharmaceutical drugs are foreign molecules that are usually isolated and ripped off of nature, they're not biologically compatible in the way that, say, foods or plant medicine that is a full living organism is, right? It doesn't have that intelligence. It loses it. It's just a dead molecule. So while sometimes pharmaceuticals are useful for short term, that plug into a receptor to manipulate it to push your body out of an emergency state, like if you need to go under for a surgery, like general anesthesia is a great thing if you have to have it. Antibiotics are great as well too in short term, but these chronic, especially the psychotropic meds, work by basically manipulating a receptor with a foreign synthetic molecule that hacks, in this case, the GABA system, dumps the GABA, the system calms down in the short term. But what it's doing is it's actually releasing your body's available stores of GABA. So it's borrowing from tomorrow's mental and emotional state and its chemistry to pay for today. So I call them biochemical credit cards, right? Like, and alcohol's in this category too. This kind of leads into another part of the conversation that we can talk about, right? It's like,
Yeah.
a lot of us don't really think about these things in these terms. We just know we take something and then we feel better. And then we wonder why like our health deteriorates or we don't get healthier and we get habituated to certain things. But really, all drugs sort of work on this borrow from tomorrow to pay for today principle. So anyways, because I was put on these aggressive drugs, I got habituated to them very quickly because borrow from tomorrow to pay for today. Eventually, your bank account's empty, and then you're habituated to the stimulation of the credit card to be able to purchase anything, to use that analogy, or to be able to have that chemistry flowing. And the problem then is if you're in my situation and you go off the drug, now your seizures that you were already having go up tenfold and they become lethal, right? So I was because I was already close to lethal before then. So I was in a really dangerous situation.
Wow.
Which then brought me to our discussion last time and coming across this plant medicine that we've now, become one of the major importers in the United States of, and it's called Kava. And it's an anti-anxiety plant medicine that's the quintessential social lubricant and mental optimization beverage and food of Polynesian culture. So they use it like we use alcohol or coffee or even CBD. They use it for like basically all those purposes. But it's like this beautiful, amazing food, just like coffee is a food, but kava is not addictive at all. But kava is a relaxing, stress relieving, but also, mentally optimizing drink where you're calm, relaxed, but yet engaged, focused, and you're loose and your mind is opened and you feel more emotion and empathy and all these things. And so it's great as a social lubricant, but it's prepared from the roots of this plant that grows in Polynesia in these island chains like Fiji and Vanuatu and other places. And it elicits this effect that's kind of similar to alcohol in some respects, but then the opposite in others, right? It's alcohol without the drunkenness plus mind expansion. So it puts people in this great state where it creates these amazing, authentic, like almost family-like atmospheres where people connect in this beautiful way. And so it's just great for the culture because it's good for you. It doesn't give you a hangover. It allows people to connect authentically. And it's this amazing medicine. But I was using it medically. And I came across a Polynesian by happenstance, long story short, that when I was at my worst and habituated to these drugs and having the convulsions and near death, that he reached out to me again, and he was from this island chain called Vanuatu, where most of the world's kava comes from. And I said, I have to get leverage over this thing, but I can't eat any foods to get better. I can't take any supplements. I can't do anything that I had learned because everything was making me react. He said, well, and I said, I tried medical cannabis. I'm looking at a way to get off these drugs. He said, have you tried kava? I said, well, yeah, I tried what I thought was kava. In the United States, we have this extract form that's kind of like chamomile tea. That's not the same thing as a traditional.
You can get them in like tea bags, what you're saying, because I've seen like the kava teas that are mixed with chamomile, but I'm sure
usually it'll be called like kava, and with kava, it's like when you see the name twice, it's usually an extract form, and it's not what I'm talking about. It's from the same plant, but it's kind of like a small shade of like what the medicinal effects of kava hold. Even some of our products that aren't the strongest because they're like retail focused or they're this or that, they still have a profile that's much, much larger than what's in those extracts. But anyways, he told me that he kind of laughed whenever I said like that I had tried that. He was like, that's not real kava, dude. Like that's kind of like a joke to us, because he's like, that's an Americanized, like you guys screw up everything type of
yeah.
And it's like, and so I was like, well, great. How do I get a hold of the real stuff? He basically, one of his family farms had some like aged 20-year-old kava plants. And kava, when you grow it, it ages like wine. And while it's growing, like it becomes more robust and more potent the longer it grows. So they had like one of these 20-year-old kava plants, right, that they harvested and then froze it. It was fresh frozen. The most potent way you can have kava is just like fresh right out of the. So that, they froze the fresh roots and they sent them to me, and then he taught me how to prepare it. It's just a long process. You're squeezing it off into this bowl and pressure it. But that's the only way to get the full effects is to do it like that. It takes like 45 minutes. It's muddy water, it tastes bad, but who cares? Because I was in the situation. And so I start drinking the stuff and like not expecting much, but I'm just desperate, right, for anything, right? And it's like 2 weeks later, I'm just like not having convulsions anymore. Like I'm just like it's like it's crazy, and I didn't even believe it. I'm just like, because it was just like every day I'm just like wincing doing anything because anything could send me into a horrific, torturous convulsion. And I just wasn't having them. It's like 80% of them, 90% of them were just gone, and they were happening at a much less level than ones that were still there. And so I'm like, this is insane. And so I just started taking higher dosages, and then was able to get off of the benzodiazepines within 6 weeks. And that is like a medical miracle for the situation I was in. For how fragile my body was, those drugs to taper safely, it takes about a year and a half for the average person that's in a situation like that. And that's if you can do it then. And I found later, basically, I fell in love with Kava because of this and just delved into the medical and scientific literature on it, realized there was all this robust literature in the scientific community that no one knows about because the public doesn't know about it. There's this big gap between it. So the Polynesians knew about it. People in the scientific community knew about it, but the public doesn't, so it's like one of those things. So I got into it because of that and kind of became a huge advocate for it, boots on the ground, got to know the Polynesian people very well. And we formed this International Kava Coalition. Later on, I joined that, and we do a lot of work for integrating it into modern culture. And it kind of came at this perfect juncture in time where the culture already is in this sort of expansive Renaissance period where we're sort of reassessing our relationship with all synthetic and foreign molecules and degrees of divorcement or separation from the intelligence of nature. I call most of these illnesses, actually, one of my core philosophies that I go by is that, most human suffering and all these mysterious chronic diseases are the sole cause is what I call nature divorcement syndrome. Different degrees of nature divorcement syndrome. The more degrees of separation that we create between that core intelligence that runs our body and runs the ecology, and the more that we live in artificial environments and boxes and are no longer exposed to that intelligence through the light and through the energy of the earth and through the water and the more that we have these foreign substances integrated into our physical bodies and our life, that's degrees of separation. And when you become divorced, the more divorced you become from that intelligence, which is the life-sustaining sort of essence of everything. It is the creation force. So it would, stand to reason, the more we divorce from it, we start to manifest levels of weakness, lack of resilience, degeneration, disease, and even insanity in some degrees, right? But anyways, our work came across at this perfect juncture here where there was like this emergence of all of this sort of public Renaissance stuff, but more specifically on the alcohol and drug side, there's this sober curious movement that's started to emerge out of this too. Because as we're reassessing our relationship with all synthetic substances, we're also very much like re-questioning our relationship with things that we've just accepted as an everyday part of our lives in every social situation, that we all engage in, that we all grew up with, and that is alcohol. It's in America, alcohol shapes our social environments in the way that Kava shapes it in Polynesia. And they think that's stupid because they're like, why would you do that? It's like, you feel like crap the next day. A percentage of people get angry, they get in fights, and you'll never see a fight break out in a Kava bar. So anyways, this all just kind of
and Cam, can I say something on that note? It's really funny that you're saying that because we are at this really cultural renaissance, and I see more and more social media influencers bragging about how they don't drink alcohol. And like, that was not the case like 5 years ago. I mean, not that people were bragging about them drinking alcohol, but the idea that I see so many popular people with amount of followers kind of saying like, yeah, I don't drink. You do? Like, why? And it's so funny. And just so you know, like, I like to have a glass of red wine here and there. I don't get drunk anymore. I could care less about that, but I do like red wine. And anytime I will randomly buy a bottle, my wife will look at me with like the harshest look and be like, why are you buying this? And I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, it's bad for you. Like, out of everybody, like there's neurotoxins in the wine. Like, why do I have to tell you this? And I'm like, yeah, but I like it. I also, just so you know, I don't drink very regularly. And because of you, when we moved to Idaho, there's a Kava bar out here, and we will go frequently and get Kava. When I met you, I was the first time I actually had the serum that you make. But then when I found this Kava bar out here, we'll go out there regularly, and you can bring back your own. And sometimes I'll get bags, and like you said, I'll milk my own. And I drink that. I very rarely drink alcohol, but every now and then. But anyways, to your point, it's just funny. Everyone's starting to realize, wait, why are we drinking alcohol? It's a freaking neurotoxin. Like, why would you have your liver has to expel that. Kava doesn't have to do that, you know? So
Part of what a Renaissance period actually is like so much of so much of what we all know deep down intuitively that's sort of existing in the collective subconscious starts to emerge to the conscious. And so it's sort of like, it's not that we all don't already know this, right? It's that we just have such an attachment to something that brings us comfort, and it brings us, if you Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or if you read people's work like Tony Robbins, for example. He's got his like 6 basic human needs that we all need, and one of the core ones is certainty. Like that's like we need a sense of certainty in our lives, right? And we seek that in our relationships. We seek that, it's linked into our primal drive for survival. We have to feel safe. We have to feel that the predator's not going to get us, but we associate a lot of different things outside of just a physical predator with making us unsafe. Obviously we need a sense of connection in our tribe, because whenever we were early as a species, if we weren't connected to the tribe and we were ostracized, then we would die without the tribe, right? So there's a lot of these things that are encoded in our evolutionary biology, but certainty is definitely one of them. And this whole thing around things like alcohol, right? The reason why we haven't talked about the obviousness of like some of its drawbacks is because we have such an attachment, because it meets temporarily, even in an unhealthy way, many times it meets some of our needs, or gives the feeling that it meets our needs, right? In the sense of like, it gives us a sense of comfort. It allows us to relax. It allows us to open up a little bit and connect with other people, right? Or we think, but even though that the quality of those conversations oftentimes aren't as high quality as we think, just because we have so much dopamine flooding through our mind when we have them, it feels as though it's meaningful, but oftentimes we have little to show for it afterwards, especially if we're very drunk, because we don't remember it. We're not really investing in like meaningful, deep conversations that end up in long-term relationships. Oftentimes it's more, the more you drink, the more surface level the conversation gets. Now there is a sweet spot where you drink a little bit. And by the way, me personally, I'm not anti-alcohol. I'm not really anti anything. I'm pro-education for people, just understanding how things affect us, and then properly, responding adequately. And if you know what something actually is and you're honest about it, then you can formulate a proper relationship and a proper proximity that is right for you, right? So like even the Sober Curious movement is not an anti-alcohol movement. It's more just an honest exploration of what might lie beyond it, right? Of like, are there strategies, rituals, right? Practices, right, that are emerging, compounds like Kava, that allow us to basically meet those needs, right, that we're trying to meet, as far as stress reduction, connection with other people, an elevated mental and emotional state. Are there ways that we can actually build that from within without charging it on credit, like I mentioned earlier, right? And ended up in this depletion cycle that really just brings your cognitive and emotional baseline down and down. By baseline, I mean, if you drink consistently, you don't realize it, but over time it's depleting your neurochemistry. So then your sober baseline of how you feel without alcohol is worse. So then you need alcohol more, right? So it's like, how can part of what we teach through compounds like Kava and many other things is like, how do we like build up our natural elevated and mental and emotional states and build them sustainably from within, so that we feel great, so that like we don't actually feel like we have to have artificial stimulation. Like we can like fully engage and like have this sort of adventurous, like thriving emotional state where we engage in all of our experiences in life, like we did when we were kids. When your brain chemistry is thriving, everything was an adventure, everything was an exciting, partly because you hadn't screwed up your brain chemistry yet, and life hadn't chipped away and exhausted your ability to have sensation and experience. But yeah, so it's not an anti-alcohol movement, but it is really interesting, what you said, because it's not like, none of us are really out to demonize any of these things, right? It's like there's a time and a place for a lot of these pharmaceuticals, right? And like I said, in acute emergency circumstances, or even like certain compounds that can be addictive, there's a time and a place to pulse them. But we have to be honest about what they are and what they're doing. Like the credit card analogy, most people don't know that. So they just take things blindly. And we're in this time where we instead of just believing in things blindly, we're starting to realize the power of understanding. And that's different than just believing it, you know, in a philosophy. Like, so if you understand what it is, then we can collectively evolve to where we just have a more mature relationship with all these things, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Such a good point. I think that was one of the big things my wife was trying to drill into me is like, why? Why are you drinking this? Do you even know the why? And I'm like, well, I really actually enjoy the taste. Like, I'm not, there's no goal for me to get drunk. I could care less. But I enjoy like some red wine with a meal or something like that.
Yeah.
So to your point, really cool just to hear. And I think that's a really big one for people that I want to just kind of reiterate what your story. Kava was the elixir, if you will, that gave you the space. Because when you're in autoimmune conditions and you're in this state of just hyper fight or flight and you're having seizures 10 times a day, you can't, there's no like, oh, let me go to this. You don't even have the bandwidth to go to another functional medicine doctor and try a new therapy because
Yeah.
you're miserable. But Kava gave you that space to be able to go, oh my God, like I can actually think clearly now and then look for other avenues of health to see what will work. And so I think it's just really, really neat that was the elixir that did that for you.
Well, and oftentimes that's what we need more than anything when we're caught in the whirlwind of a perpetual traumatic or stressful situation, right? Because when we're in a traumatic situation, literally our body goes into a hypersympathetic mode where all of our blood, it's that evolutionary thing. If a cheetah or a lion comes out, blood goes away from the parts of your brain that like are reflective and allow you to strategically like do the best thing for yourself over the long term. Blood just goes to the areas of the brain that just like stimulate fight or flight and focus to either fight that thing or run and get the hell out of there. So it's just like this whole thing. And if you have strategies in place to where you can take a pause or to create a safe space for yourself internally through something that you take or externally through just creating a safe space to help you get in there, then it can give you a type of solace and it can give you a type of like sanctity, right? To where you can actually formulate a proper strategy, right? And actually where you can actually like, okay, let me mobilize an actual response instead of just being caught. And also being caught in that also just exhausts you. So like you said, it exhausts your bandwidth. So many people, the reason why, you know, like when I work on the clinical side of things with compounds like Kava, the reason why we layer medicines like Kava into almost every protocol for every chronic disease thing, it's not because it's like a magic bullet for everything or all these. It's really good for some things, but it's good for almost anything because they're all driven by stress and trauma. And so if you can bring someone some more comfort, it allows them to open up and to actually get into a place where they can intuitively and reflectively just like, okay, I got this, instead of being in that sort of shrinked by their, you know, where you have that safe space, you kind of start to expand. You're like, okay, I got this. You know what I mean? So
yeah, and I'm looking back at my notes from the first episode we took. All the benefits of Kava, I'm just going to run down this quick list. Helpful for deep and REM sleep. Reduces cravings for drugs. It's an anti-craving agent in general. So if you're trying to lose weight and stuff like that, it helps rewire your brain, upgrading empathy, increasing GABA levels, obviously good for sleep and mood. It blocks sodium calcium channels, good for EMF protection. It's a COX-2 inhibitor, which means it can help with inflammation, like the same thing they use for like NSAID. So it can help with pain and inflammation, intestinal issues. It's an NRF2 activator, right? So it can help activate these detox pathways. And it's an AMPK activator. These are all the notes I have from our last one. So AMPK
these are good notes. Yeah.
Yeah, good for weight loss, right? These are all the things we're talking about. So
Yeah.
when you're looking at Kava, it's like, oh my God, this is almost, like you said, it's almost too good to be true, but why not add it? Why not add it into what you're doing?
Well, it's funny too. I'll say one thing about that, this sort of too good to be true type of thing. So many of the best medicines that we find out of the natural world, even foods, when you look into their benefits, it doesn't mean that they're like have an A+ in all of these categories and that they totally, because it's good for weight loss and it's like a magic bullet necessarily for any one of those things. It can be very close to a magic bullet for some things. It's that powerful of a medicine. But for the most part, the reason why some of these medicines are good at so many different things is the same reason why whenever you develop yourself as a complex living organism, you become good at a lot of different things. When you're in a state where you start to expand, all of a sudden you become good at learning and adapting and growing. And, you know, all of these things, like the tide rises everything, right? You know, when you start to get on a good momentum with something, all these things start to get better. And it's because a plant is a living organism, it kind of works in the same way. They develop these characteristics usually through hormesis. They are under very stressful conditions, so they develop this adaptive chemistry that helps them adapt to these harsh conditions. Then whenever you take the organism into your body, it's shaped by the same intelligence that shaped your body, which is why it's compatible, right? But because it's developed those characteristics, you've taken it in, and then it transfers those characteristics to you, right? I call it forming a relationship with the plant, just like you form a relationship with a person.
Going
And
back to the nature, also reminding me when you talk about nature, we're so
yeah,
disconnected. This is important. Yeah.
exactly. It's part of nature reintegration, obviously, is part of what gets people well, is getting them back in natural light with natural whole foods, eating for things that were alive recently. It's reinfusing intelligence back into your body. Kava is a very specific type of intelligence that has specific characteristics. But that's the reason why it's good at so many things. And if you look at Kava's identity, it really is a protective substance. It has, like I said, it has very harsh conditions, so it developed the chemistry to adapt to those things. And whenever an organism develops adaptive, chemistry towards something or an adaptation towards something, it doesn't just do it with one mechanism. It does it across all of the mechanisms that sustain adaptation throughout a biological organism. So it's not like a drug that just hits one mechanism like a GABA center. That's just one of Kava's. It has this full spectrum sort of adaptive and protective characteristic. And because it's protective in nature, all of those mechanisms that you just listed are just different entry points to the neuro and tissue protective sequence in the body. Part of them, like NRF2, upregulate antioxidants like glutathione and superoxide dismutase that help to quell the inflammation of that irritation that takes place during stress. The GABA system shuts down the overfiring of the nerves. Obviously the COX-1, COX-2 inhibition, it's like an NSAID. It lowers inflammation. It's quieting the body, and it's building this parasympathetic nervous system back by signaling it to turn on the right systems to regenerate itself. And so that's why it's good for so many things. And the metabolic effects are another protective mechanism, because under stress, we can't, in order to adapt whenever, say, the stress of food not being present, right? In order to adapt, we have to shift into this mode where we can get energy from our own stored body fat and bad tissues. And that's another protective mechanism, because that's fat metabolism. It generates ketones. Ketones in the brain are neuroprotective as well. So it's part of this neuroprotective sequence. So really, we're not talking about a bunch of effects. We're talking about one effect that's consistent throughout the entire biological organism. And that's why it can be good for so many things. So it's not, even though it kind of sounds woo-woo, and that's why a lot of people sometimes in the past have like shied away from natural things. It's like, it sounds like, well, no, it's because when you find a real medicine that has a real characteristic, it addresses most things for a person on some level, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting in that way. So
I wanted to ask you really quickly, when I started going to this kava bar in Idaho, I was learning, I'll go there and they have 3 different kind of kavas to try. And I'm like, well, what do you want to, you can feel more euphoria. You can feel more like kind of relaxed. What do you want to feel is kind of the way that we talk about it. And there's different strands of kava, which I didn't really even know. I was wondering for you, with your serum, I know it's a highly concentrated one. How did you decide on that strand? I'm assuming, or how does that work? And I was thinking about this, will you in the future have different strands, or is it just the one that you picked is like pretty much like it's going to cast a wide net?
Yeah, it's a great question. So kava, just like, because it's an adaptive organism, right? Just like people, it's like we're all people, but we all developed under different conditions, which we express different layers of the of human characteristics. Some of them are more expressed in certain people and others. It's a similar thing. So, but kava, even with that spectrum of its identity as far as a stress reliever and a mental optimizer, there's this spectrum of some of the kava strains have grown to adapt and express more of the sort of mental clarity, mental stimulating, like, social lubricant aspect that comes through the dopamine system much more. And some have adapted and are cultured and cultivated rather, to express more of the heavy GABAergic sort of relaxing. So kind of like cannabis, there's some that are more heady and some that are more heavy, right?
Yeah.
Some are more like in the body, some are more induce sleep quicker. and then some are sort of more nootropic. But all kava, like no kava is stimulating to the point where it's like it doesn't improve anxiety or something. It's not like caffeine. But and all kava is anti-anxiety, but some leaves you more awake and focused while it's reducing anxiety, and some relaxes you and lulls you into a sleep. What we wanted is the kavas that are most highly prized and highly loved, and just for like broad spectrum of different purposes, right? Meaning you could take it any time of the day and get a little bit of everything. It's and it not like puts you to sleep, but it also not like wire you too much or activates you too much. Are these strains that have been bred to kind of be right in the middle, and like there's a strain called Baragu that's like that, right? Where it's kind of like, which is kind of like alcohol, right? Like it activates your mind, gets you going, relaxes you at the same time, and it's this kind of synergistic type of thing. So we created, whenever because we were kind of introducing kava to the mass market in a way that people hadn't been exposed to kava before. Whenever you're trying to popularize something at scale culturally and create a lifestyle brand and stuff like that, and create a category, because that's what we're doing, like in our health, in our retail launches, is just like kombucha was a new category, years ago.
Yeah.
That is there's coffee, there's tea, and then there's kombucha. It's not just an existing product under an existing category. Kava is the same way. So when you're creating a new category, you don't want to create too much decision fatigue for people. When it's like, we wanted to give someone the best representation of generally what kava is, that's going to meet the most needs across the board, be the most versatile, and say, this is kava. And then as we popularize it, we plan on layering in more specialized forms of it, right? Like for very specific, especially on the medical side, when we really start to build out the medical product lines, you're gonna have much more potent versions of kava that you wouldn't get at a checkout counter, that are still safe and still leave you feeling sober, but just more intense in their effects. But yeah, so that's pretty much the landscape. So our strains, we developed a proprietary, like a blend that what we feel is the most versatile of those things, and the most balanced, and that's what we stick to in all of our existing products. So
Yeah.
in the
That makes
future, we
sense.
are going to specialize.
No,
But
that's
yeah,
cool. And then the serum, just to give people an idea, because that was your flagship product. Now you've got all kinds of things. You've got kava shots. You've got the drinks, the beverages, which is awesome, like the
so we
carbonate.
got the drink mixes coming up here in a couple months. They're going to come, like, you'll eventually be able to get them at retail, and so we're going to have, like, sachets, just like collagen. You get a box of stick pack sachets, and then this also comes in a tub, right? That can be used. That can be added to, just like amino acids can be added as an athletic recovery type thing that
Wow.
addresses nervous system recovery, not just muscle recovery. You can add to your protein shakes. You can add to your coffee to enhance it, because it's going to be like vanilla flavored. It's just like a creamer. You can just add it to coffee. There's nice synergy
Oh,
there.
cool.
So anyways, we'll have those coming up too.
That's exciting. But I wanted to ask you, in terms of, if you're out there looking for like I'm assuming the serum is giving you the most. Not, I don't want to say bang for your buck, but the serum is more concentrated. Like, if I have like a dose of the serum, do you think that's like drinking one little shell of coconut shell of kava? Like, how would you equate it? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's about, the serum, it's an oil that's on, so kind of like people take cannabis oil and stuff like that, but it's just a full spectrum traditional kava oil. And the way that we press it was through a specially developed pressing method that doesn't oxidize any. That's why it has some oils in there from seeds that would normally be bad for you if they were gotten from most other sources, if they're not in seeds, because they oxidize so easily. But we have a hydraulic pressing mechanism that doesn't grind or pull oxygen into the oil, doesn't oxidize anything. But we had to do it like that just because we didn't want to use any solvents, because we wanted to keep the entourage effect of all the constituents in it. And have a dry oil
Wow.
product. So anyways, but that one dose of that, which is about a dropper full, is about like one shell of kava, which is like about equivalent to like one of the drinks, the canned drinks that we have, or one of the shots.
Yeah.
It's not an exact apples to apples because the pressing method, even though it does have the entourage of everything, it accentuates a little bit more of the sort of, like, I guess you would say, just like anxiety relieving, clinically therapeutic side of things. And it's not quite as social lubricating as the drink is. even though it is the same strain. Make sure it's the way that we naturally prepare it and extract it, where it's more of sort of like your, it's better for, there's 30 doses in a vial. So it's more of like your daily tonic that you take to prevent anxiety or to take it during anxiety, type of situation.
Yeah.
But also offers a nootropic kick as well too. Like we have the Kavaplex Mind, which is a Tongan strain. It's, we've got two different oils. One is the regular Kavaplex, that's what I describe, and one is more of the heady side. And that goes really well, just like our powders will in coffee, because there's a synergy. Caffeine like pulls it into the brain faster. And there's this nootropic thing that happens that also is like a jitter-free sort of euphoric, elevated, but yet grounded and intuitive like state of mind. That's just like the perfect state of mind. So yeah, but generally it is about like one serving of kava as far as lactones are concerned and stuff in the dropper. So.
Okay. Amazing. I know we got to run here in a little bit. You were just touching on it, but I was going to ask you anyways, any newer and exciting projects? It sounds like you've got the sachets coming out. Anything else though that you can allude to?
Yeah, I mean, right now we're in sort of the middle of this whole retail push integration.
What are we thinking? Are we going to see you at Whole Foods, Sprouts? What's happening here? Can you?
Sprouts? We actually have been in Sprouts.
That's right. You're in Sprouts already. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're going through their innovation program right now, where it's like you're basically put on the front lines with all the innovative products, and it's a test and learn period of like trying to gather data and figure out where it places in the store and so on and so forth. And so we'll find out what the full relationship is going to be with Sprouts here very soon. But so we've been in Sprouts. We were supposed to launch in Whole Foods last year, but there was the category merchant, technical term if you understand retail, that brought us in, left the desk right before we were supposed to launch, and they just restructured their planograms and a lot of retail technical stuff. But basically, like, it just put off the launch, and so we'll be looking at resubmitting with them and trying to get a whole product line instead of just one product like we were going to. We're going to start with the shots with them, the whole product line, so we can eventually have full end caps of like all TruKava products. We'll have the powders, the tubs, the sachets, the checkout counter, the shots at the checkout counter. So we're building out a full lifestyle brand that's concentrated towards natural grocery. We're also going to go pretty heavily into, but there's those chains that are nationwide. Those opportunities, since they've been on the table, we want to do that. But we're also going to go kind of inch wide, mile deep into really trying to get all these launches going of the mid-tier sort of health food chains in these key hotspot areas like Austin or like all of California and New York, where we have the highest concentration of early adopters to kind of really continue to spark the movement. So a lot of chains at once in those areas as we continue to gather data. On that front, kombucha, we know the people from GT that started the whole kombucha movement, right? GT kombucha, now it's everywhere. We're taking an almost identical blueprint. If they would have dropped kombucha straight and then sold into 7-Eleven, which they could have, it would have died because that wasn't an early concentration of a huge number of passionate adopters that would set a movement and proliferate the message. To get regular conventional people that are not health connoisseurs to adopt it. So, but what they did is that they built the brand and the movement in Whole Foods and Sprouts and natural grocers and all these places that I'm talking about, these hotspots, Erewhon in California, and you popularize the movement there, and then you penetrate out into conventional grocery.
I love that.
So that's the trajectory of how you spawn a cultural movement. We could go just to get short-term sales and sell it into a bunch of 7-Elevens and convenience stores and liquor stores and head shops and all this stuff. But then Kava would get this characteristic, like a lot of people think it is, just sort of like this natural high, like synthetic marijuana, but it's not. It's a food like coffee, and the culture deserves for it to be like that. So that's what we're doing.
I agree. There's so much to it. The more I've gotten to drink it and learn about it, there's so much culture to it. And it is a very interesting, I never, ever felt loopy or drunk on Kava. The best thing I can tell people is that I just feel after a couple shells, I'll feel just grounded, just kind of zen, just like present, but not any direction or the other. And it's just a great chance. My wife and I love to just go out there and have a couple kavas and just connect. Yeah. So it's a lot of fun. I'm excited you're going to be in retail too, because I'd rather, pick up a couple 6-packs and stuff of True Kava there than having to order online.
Just have the shipping weight and the whole thing. It's a temporary thing that we're doing to popularize the concept. But in the future, the drinks that we have, all of our drinks, they'll mainly be a brick and mortar product, retail product, because most people want to buy their drinks at stores. They want to order
Yep.
cases and cases. And then the lead products D2C will be all of the powders and stuff, the drink mixes
Yep.
and stuff like that, just like you order protein powders and stuff. Of course, you'll be able to get those retail too, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely, I want to order my drinks at the store, or not order them at the store, but pick them up at the store, because then you can just pick up a few at a time, and it's just like picking up water or
Yep. Yep.
anything else.
Yeah.
So.
Dude, amazing stuff. So great to catch up with you. I'm excited that the brand is still rocking and rolling. Just more and more new and good is coming out with True Kava. So excited. Last but not least, dude, let everybody know where they can just connect with you and the family at True Kava.
Yeah. Just go to trukava.com, and just on all the standard social media at TruKava, IG, Facebook, all this stuff, you can actually check out some of the work that we're doing with the coalition that's non-brand based, and you can look up basically all of the primary published studies. We've got a reservoir of all the literature on the Kava Coalition website. It would be kavacoalition.org, and there's some videos if you want to just dive into more of Kava's origin and its cultural history and stuff like that. It's just a good resource.
Yeah.
And then all of, as far as the True Kava stuff is on trukava.com.
Yeah. Amazing. Cameron George, True Kava. Appreciate you, brother.
Thanks, man.